Okay, well, thank you very much for those of you who've come back. And I know once again that I've had quite a few messages from people who weren't able to attend the live session or who can't attend the whole of this session. So the recording will be available as soon as I can get it out Thursday evening, or probably more likely Friday morning by the time Zoom does the buffering and I can get it into the email. So yesterday we focused on the internal foundation. This is day 2 of my 3 event. And yesterday we focused on the internal foundations, so the gut, nutrients, inflammation, and the tools, elimination diet, and reintroduction, which are really important. And today's focus is about the environmental and systemic drivers. So these are the drivers that keep our eczema flare reoccurring, the inside load. So that even when you've tidied up your diet or your lifestyle, these are the things that keep it carrying on and what turns it in from an acute episode into a chronic episode. So we're going to focus on the next 5 strands out of my 10 strand packs, which are hormones, stress, which I've separated out from hormones, even though stress is very much about the cortisol hormone, sensitivities and skin barrier. And I've put those together because it's things that touch the skin, but also the skin barrier itself is covered in the strand. Liver support, fundamental, and then something which is slightly separate, but which is driven by inflammation and also driven by hormones, and we'll come on to it within this presentation, but the histamine and the mast cell activation syndrome. I know there's a lot of information about it on the internet. About 3 years ago now, I think it was, I wrote a series of 5 articles about histamine. So they're probably still on my website and can be tracked down if you're interested. But it's a big piece and there's a lot of information about it. And I wanted to make sure that I was guiding people safely in this topic. So starting off with the first strand that I wanted to cover today. And this is somebody also who wasn't able to attend the event, but I hope is watching today, asked me a question about histamine and hormones and the fact that they have reached menopause and their eczema that had disappeared for many, many years has now come back with a vengeance. And my answer to that is yes. Hormones are very implicated. Estrogen is very intertwined with histamine, and it isn't the only hormone that is involved with the skin. So it's progesterone, cortisol that has its own topic in the stress strand, and even thyroid hormones all affect our skin barrier. And any shifts in hormones, and if we're in perimenopause or menopause, or puberty, or pregnancy, sorry, going backwards and backwards, all those kinds of hormonal shifts can heighten inflammation and itch. And that can even happen when we're having a normal cycle and we're cycling in and out of our different phases. That can also mean that there is a cyclical pattern to our eczema. And some of my clients come back and say, oh, I hadn't thought about it before, but now you've asked me the question and we're tracking it. Yes, I can see it starts to flare about this time in my cycle. So really important things to focus on in a nutshell with hormone balance is blood sugar balancing. And I know that's also talked about a lot, but also liver clearance, detoxification, natural detoxification, not just drinking some kind of juice occasionally. Natural everyday detoxification is really important to help steady hormones. So I was going to ask one of my prompts, has anybody in this group today noticed their skin changing at certain points of the month or even during stressful times? I'll take that as a no. Oh, definitely stressful times. Not during the month, but yes, stressful times. Okay, so we'll come on to the stress strand in a minute. Um, just one last thing before I move off this slide. Really important to think that hormones don't just shift with cycles. They also shift with our sleep patterns. Cortisol rises and lowers throughout the night. It lowers just before we go to sleep when melatonin rises to help us fall asleep, and then it rises in the morning to wake us. So, whilst we talk about cortisol a lot and to do with stress, and I'll come on to that, it isn't just about stress. So, hormones, and the cycles also shift with stress, diet, and sleep. So here we go onto the stress. So as you've already said, huge, oh my goodness, huge flare at 50 years old that has lasted for a year. That's tough, Gemma. I would like to say it in a stronger way, but that is really, really tough. Um, your skin mirrors your stress response. So if you're very stressed, and most people with eczema do recognize or do say that stress is one of the triggers. Whether it's the initial trigger is not always the case, but when we're stressed, we release histamine, our hormones. Cortisol is very good at taking a lot of the nutrients that hormone production needs. It can be become a dominant hormone. So that raised cortisol leading to raised histamine, leading to raised inflammation. And as you can see, there is this loop. So calming our nervous system and doing a lot to try and lower stress is really important. Stress also uses up a lot of nutrients. And yesterday, when we were talking about the nutrient replenish strand, I was saying about inflammation using up a lot of nutrients, but stress uses up enormous amounts of vitamins B, magnesium, and some other nutrients, zinc. So, we were already talking about some of those nutrients yesterday. So you can see how all of these patterns, if we have inflammation and we have stress, and the stress can be coming because we're inflamed and because, a huge flare that has lasted for a year, how stressful is that? It knocks out our sleep and it really depletes us, not only in energy, but actually the actual nutrients that helps us rest and repair. So I'm hoping it's becoming really clear how intertwined everything becomes. So even small daily calming habits, taking some breaths, doing some box breathing. I don't know if anybody's heard of box breathing, but you just basically breathe in for a count of four, hold for a count of four, breathe out for a count of four, hold for a count of four. And if you can't do a count of four immediately, then do the same pattern for a count of two and then just expand it. Some people can do it a little bit longer, but the whole point is just relaxing it, calming it, stopping that pattern of thinking and worrying and breathing that starts to become more rapid. Time outdoors, hug a tree, forest bathing. The Japanese love it, and I think we all should too. Um, just things that you make you feel as if you are replenishing yourself. And I often say to people, you should be doing an activity, even if it's only for 10 to 15 minutes, that makes you feel replenished and that isn't necessarily opening a kitchen cupboard. So, for some people it's reading or listening to music, but find something that you can do without leaving the house that just suddenly makes you feel good. So, I was going to ask a question now. When you feel stressed, what do you think flares first? Is it your skin? You both highlighted stress as a flare. Does it affect your digestion? Do you get impacted energetically first? Do you feel like you get fatigued and then the flare comes? What's your experience? Anxiety alongside. And do you think that anxiety is triggered by the flare, or is it the flare that triggers the anxiety, or a bit of both? Okay. So that stress has been constant and that flare has been constant. Okay. And most of your anxiety is around eczema. Okay. So you can see how it might be fueling it. Yes. Perfect. Exactly that. Somebody's just written vicious cycle. exactly that, a vicious cycle. So do what you can to control what you can. And sometimes by just doing a little bit of breathing, that can be helpful. So moving on to the next strand, which is one that isn't one that a lot of people think about related to eczema, and that's liver support. So our liver is a waste processing hub. And we talk about these detox programs and having all these green juices and things. But the fact is our liver detoxes every day, all the not all the time, because it detoxes primarily when we're asleep. During the day, it's focused on digestion and other jobs, and it needs a good night's sleep to be able to do and fulfill its detoxification job. And when it's sluggish, and that can be through stress, it can be through alcohol, low nutrient intake, or some inflammation. We recycle and process what we reprocess our estrogen before it's excreted via our liver. So everything goes through the liver. You're walking down the street, you're breathing in a bit of pollution, your liver's going to deal with it. You pop a Nurofen or take an antihistamine, your liver's going to deal with it. So everything it filters lingers longer in circulation. So if you are having to process histamine or hormones and your liver there's basically a queue waiting to be processed by the liver, then these things can be recycled. So instead of staying in the queue waiting to just leave, they just go round again. The trouble is we carry on making some. So when our liver is feeling a little bit worse for wear, then it can be harder to let go of these. And this is where we can have things like histamine levels becoming higher. And then you may have heard of a term such as estrogen dominance, where we have, more estrogen than we actually need at that time. So the important thing I want to say to you is you don't need a detox, specialized detox. What you need to do every day is feed your detox pathways. And I go into a lot of detail in my liver support about those different pathways because there are actually three pathways and they need different types of support. And sometimes we can have a fast number one pathway and then a very slow number two pathway. And that's also, we want to try and get them balanced so they're working consecutively and things that are working well. So just a very small tip is basically colorful vegetables. The more colorful you can have, and adequate protein is a really good start to provide the support for our detox pathways. So if you were going to have hazard a guess, what would be the hardest thing on your liver? Would it be alcohol, stress, or sugar? Okay, so both votes have been for alcohol. It was actually a trick question because it's usually a combination of the three. So the good news is just carry on with that colorful foods, lots of hydration. We like lots of water and rest. So not specific restriction. Does anybody have any questions about that? While I have a sip of water, I'm going to take a slight pause. Or a question on anything else I've already covered. I'll take that as a no. Unless somebody's typing. As I said, I can't see if somebody's typing at the moment. Okay, so the next strand I wanted to cover is the sensitivities and skin barrier strand. And I ended up putting these together instead of making them two separate strands because the number of strands was getting a little bit out of control for my initial four. And what's important here is that people come to me. I'm a nutritional therapist. My association is called the British Association of Nutrition and Lifestyle, where people come to me and often think, okay, well, we're definitely going to find a food trigger. And that's not always the case. Not every trigger is food. So fragrance, detergents, fabrics themselves, temperature shifts, humidity levels. And somebody asked a question yesterday about chlorine. So things like chlorine can add to your load and can really be a burden for your skin barrier. So you have to think that eczema's prone skin is reactive by nature. So when you are exposed and are touching these different products, and there are many different products that we're exposed to during a day, then it helps keep that trigger and reactivity alive and sensitivity. So reducing what it things it has to react to helps enormously. So think fragrance-free laundry liquid, things like Ecover. I don't have any associate benefits, but just all of those very sensitive products. Cooler showers, not too hot, also not too often. I know we all like to wash and be hygienic, but sometimes just too much water is problematic. And I know that I've had clients who find that when they are at home, they get used to their water and their skin's okay. And then they go away for a weekend or a holiday, and just that change of water, whether it was harder, softer, something in between, the change of water causes them to react. And then they get used to that again, and then they come home and then they react again because the water is, well, it's different again to what their skin got used to. Um, Somebody asked about the chlorine. It's very person specific. So it can irritate sensitive or broken skin because it further strips oils. And a lot of people find that chlorine is incredibly drying and that you've got to lather on lots and lots of creams straight afterwards. But for others, that chlorinated water can actually help by reducing bacteria. A lot of people with eczema have staph overgrowths on their skin. Not all of them become infected with staph, and not all of us have a staph terrain. And for them, that chlorine can really help. And then it made me think, sorry, I carried on brainstorming, is that, I have a lot of clients that are either very happy by the beach and in the sea, and they find the salt water with the iodine very, very soothing and it works very well for them. I have others who that salty iodine water is triggers massive reactions. And as soon as they come out of the sea, they have to go and make sure they shower really carefully and start themselves with cream. So I wish I could say, like with everything, that there was this one size fit all. I'm going to give you this magic formula and it will all go away, but it is very individual. And having those pieces of the puzzle and saying, okay, well, these are all my different pieces can help build up a picture and help you find out what makes you react so that you're able to take charge and can modulate your eczema in future if it comes back, because it is likely to come back because we are born with that sensitivity. Some people, as I said yesterday, have migraines or stomach ache, and some of us get a bit of both, and some of us have eczema. In terms of the chlorine, I do recommend applying a kind of oily based emollient before and after swimming and making sure that you rinse and avoid very hot showers when you get out. That can really help. So, one of my usual questions, is there anything that you've observed that your skin doesn't like? A detergent, perfume, heat, something else. And I will just give you one anecdote. I didn't go to my nephew's second birthday because we had changed washing powder and it made me react to the point where I thought I had chicken pox. And I did not have chicken pox. I just had an allergic reaction, but it really did look like chicken pox. So over to you. I'll take that as not knowing. Oh, Sleeping in beds in hotels, I have to take my own pillowcase and sheets. Wow. Can you give me a little bit more detail? What kind of reaction do you get? Just itching. Oh, that's quite a commitment. I hope you don't have to travel too much for work. That is a commitment to have to take your own sheets and pillowcases every time you travel. Extraordinary. And I'm assuming that kind of happens most of the time. Um, so whether it's you do it as a precaution, well, that sounds like the right thing to do. I'm sure different hotels have different detergent, but there's clearly a common theme there that makes you itch, and that's not good. We don't want to go away and have a restful time at a hotel, but then spend the whole night itching. Right, so we're talking about itching, so I'm going to come on to histamine. So there are a couple of things, and I'm actually going to invert my bullet points. I don't like the term histamine intolerance. It's been bandied around a lot. The the reality is that our body makes histamine. We need histamine. We need it for digestion. It's involved with stomach acid. It gets released with estrogen, so we need it as part of our cycle, and it's part of the inflammation cascade. So when we need inflammation because we've cut ourselves and we're protecting and sending all the immune system to protect us from infection, we absolutely need that histamine. We have to think about it as a messenger, not an enemy. So whilst I don't agree with histamine intolerance, because I don't think we can be allergic to something that we make ourselves, I do think that there are times where we're making just too much of it. And then when we're having foods or experiencing things that are triggering more histamine or have their own histamine or are known as histamine liberators, then there can be moments where having a lower histamine intake can be useful. Very short term, and I want to be incredibly clear about that. It's about saying, today I am super inflamed. I need to maybe watch what higher histamine foods I'm having, maybe not have too many, maybe, even just have low today. It's about mix and match and modulating those days. I've once again, I mentioned this in the elimination strand yesterday. I've had clients who come to me and like, I've been on a low histamine diet for 4 years and, I can't, eat. And every time I do this, and the lower histamine diet is helping you mop up some of that level, but it's not helping the root cause about why your histamine is so high all of the time. And that's what this strand is about. It's about focusing on stopping the excess release and supporting the clearance. So we have genes, we have the DAO gene and the HNMT gene. You can actually test for them. I work with a company called LifeCode GX and I do their nutrigenomics testing. Nutrigenomics is testing only for the genes that we can support with nutrition or lifestyle factors. So it's not genes that will dictate a specific condition or risk for a condition. These are all things that you can modulate, pathways that you can support. And they do a histamine report that monitors for those genes and also one of the detox genes. And it shows whether if you have slowing on those pathways that you might need some extra support in those. But there's lots we can do, even without knowing whether your genes are sluggish or not. There's still a lot you can do if you're experiencing high histamine symptoms and your mast cells are on constant activation, keeping that inflammation cycle going. Because what happens is there's too much histamine, it's triggering inflammation, and the inflammation is triggering more histamine. So you're just going round and round again. We were talking about you've been on a low histamine diet for about 6 months. We don't want that for too long. We really want to say what's driving it in the first place and how can we stop that. So, that's a really important and interesting point. Histamine helps defend the body. When mast cells stay overactive, histamine floods the system, and then you're constantly getting that redness, itch, and swelling. And triggers can be, the stress, the inflammation cascade itself, but it can also be alcohol or temperature changes, and even that poor liver clearance. You're not able to, you're recycling the histamine rather than excreting it. So, an important part of the histamine is supporting gut, liver, and stress balance to help bring it back into balance. So I was going to ask if your skin gets worse after wine, leftovers, or periods of high stress. I know that one of you's already been on a low histamine diet for about 6 months. If you want to share what made you move on to that, I would love to hear about it. Okay, so you went on the diet on the hope that it would reduce some symptoms, but it has done, but not significantly. So the underlying driver is still there. And the histamine, you've managed to take the edge off it, but you've not been able to actually stop that cascade from carrying round. Um, so, it's a clue. It's not an allergy, it's a clue that your system is overloaded. Okay, perfect. Okay, so connecting the dots. So you've got to think all of these things are interconnected. I've created all of these strands, and as I said, when I work one to one, these strands all work together. And what I tend to do is say we can't work on everything. So which of the strands, which of the parts of the puzzle and the picture do I think have got the most consequence, might be at the root of the biggest driver of the flare, and that we'll focus on first, so that in the end there's this cascade effect of the things underneath which were of still driving but of lesser importance, but that cascade effect means that there's less of a burden. So if you've seen or heard me say tonight, hormones go to the liver, which go to histamine, histamine goes to the liver, which go to hormones. Stress has an impact on the immune system, which then has an impact on skin. Skin, if its skin barrier is broken, and I didn't really talk very much about the skin barrier, I'm sorry, just very conscious of time. But a broken skin barrier then has an effect on the immune system, because you touch something, even food, it it alerts the immune system, which is just under the skin, and then your body can then say that is an alien, and then you eat it. So let's say I had broken eczema skin and I touched a kiwi, and then it was labeled as problematic, and then 3 weeks later I ate a kiwi, and my body is still going to say that's problematic. And there is some research when I did my master's dissertation, there was some really interesting research that I included in there about that exact point, about how the skin barrier and the gut are so linked, but also the skin microbiome. We've got a whole population of bacteria. We talk about it all the time in the gut. We're told to take Yakult or Actimel or whatever, but there's also a really active skin microbiome that talks very much to the gut microbiome. So that I've kind of come back around to it, but that skin barrier, chemical, environmental sensitivities covers both, all of that. So everything interacts. So already, if you focus on one, the thing that you think is your highest driver, and calm that down, it can start to help the other ones and help you see more of the wood for the trees. you know, so last point, just checking my notes. That's why progress often feels inconsistent. because the trap is light, tightening or loosens depending on what's happening on different systems at different times. So hormones, for example, may not be an issue at a certain time of the month and then suddenly become an issue at a different time of the month. So it is about making sure that everything is in balance and that you're conscious that whatever you're doing has an impact on other systems. We talk very much in medicine today about everything in a very compartmentalized way, and that in terms of medication and operations is incredibly important. But in terms of something like nutrition and lifestyle, we try and broaden it out and say, how can we support the whole system because they all have an effect on each other? So, just coming to the end, I was going to ask you the question for you to think, and you can either share it on here or you can just consider it and reflect on it for yourself. You know, when does your skin feel the most stable? Are there any things that you think, oh, yeah, if I can manage to get this perfect situation, that's when my skin feels at its best? Or conversely, my skin flares with, and we've talked about things like stress today, hormones. Is there something that you think this presentation and yesterday's session has made you think, aha, these were things I've not thought about, and yes, I can now see a pattern? Okay. Okay. So being at home, resting, eating and hydrating well, not being on the move too much, your skin can be best. So your skin needs the routines, you to be calm and for things that it knows and feels reassured by. That's what that sounds like. And I completely understand it. And it could be, yes. So it could be part of that thing that I was saying earlier about, the change of water, the change of sheets, um, hotel or even at somebody else's house if you've gone to stay with family. Um, that could be an issue for you. So staying calm. Okay. So we're just about wrapping up tonight's session, and I'm going to ask if there's any questions that you have, just to let you know about tomorrow. So you will obviously get the recording on probably Friday morning if I was hoping Thursday night, but it finishes quite late and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do it. Friday morning, the recording of all three events. And tomorrow's event is all about connecting all of the dots and helping you. I have a quiz and some interactive things that we'll do to identify the strands that are the most implicated in fueling or maintaining your flares so that you can start to think about where you need to act to help you break free of your eczema trap. So I hope that's been helpful. And oh, sorry, I don't know if it was somebody on here, but asked me the kind of recipes. So each of the 10 strands comes with its own modules, its own workbooks, its own worksheets, and each of them has their own recipe booklets. And as I said yesterday, each recipe booklet has 21 recipes for breakfast, 21 for lunch, and 21 for dinner, and 7 snack recipes. So they have all been tailored specifically for the different strands. So the elimination strand will only include foods that are acceptable for elimination, so the least um, triggering type foods. The store strand will have foods that are good for supporting the gut microbiome and the integrity of the gut mucosal wall. So all of them is so these are the kind of recipes. I don't know if you can see them very well, but these are the kind of recipes that they include. They are not very complicated. They don't have extraordinary ingredients, because that's not how I live. I don't think it's how most people live. We want to be able to do something very easily in the evenings, that we can just pull together and that we can maybe get multiple members of our family to eat without any complaining. At least that's what I try to do. So, with that in mind, does anybody have any questions or queries or any ideas about what I can add? Because I'd be happy to into the tomorrow night session. Please do share it. Any questions? If not, I will let you get on with your evenings in peace. Thank you very much for joining me for this second evening in a row. I know it's a lot to take up your evenings each time. Or you would be good to hear anything about heat. You get so much heat on your face. That's the inflammation, Gemma. So that was all about the kind of histamine and the inflammation strand. We'll go through a little bit more tomorrow and I'll give a bit more information about that. Thank you for that question. I'm going to write it down um, before I forget, and I will make sure that I address that specifically in tomorrow's session. There is, if you're on Practice Better and you've activated your account, there is you have a possibility to chat with me direct. So do feel free that if you've got any questions that you want to ask outside the forum of these recorded sessions, please feel free to do so. I also offer free introductory calls, so you can always schedule in with me, even if it's just to say, I've been past the live event and I just wanted to just ask this question. That's absolutely fine. I absolutely understand. Thank you very much for your time, your patience, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. Take care. Bye.